Hi, my name is Brett Stinson. I'm with Vero. Today we're going to talk a little bit about Cisco UCS and how it's taken the IT industry by storm. Talk a little bit about traditional blade systems and 2U servers that have been leveraged for virtualization and just standard compute over the years. You know, as we start looking at virtualization infrastructure, people are starting to try to figure out how can I get the most out of my virtualization? How can I manage it from a long-term standpoint as my farm grows? And how do I deal with physical servers that I just can't seem to get into my virtual infrastructure? So as you start looking at historically where things have kind of gone, blade centers have always been the workhorse for large environments. But as you start looking at virtualization, people have kind of backed off against traditional blade centers because of the complexity that's associated with those, and we'll get into that in a second, to come back over to a 2U server environment to simplify the infrastructure so that they're minimizing the things that they need to worry about from a management standpoint as they're troubleshooting. So 2U servers were a very simplistic approach of accomplishing this. The challenge with 2U servers, though, is you've got a lot of cabling, you've got power and cooling issues, and it takes up a big footprint. So you've got a couple of HBAs, you've typically got about 8 to 9 Ethernet ports that are coming out. From a management standpoint, you've got power. You know, as you start looking at scaling a whole rack of these servers, you end up getting a very large bundle of cabling coming out of each server. Makes for some cumbersome work. Every so many servers, you're going to need to add additional switches, both fiber channel and Ethernet. So as you start kind of scaling this thing out, you're adding more switches as time goes along, and it starts getting to be kind of a behemoth when it comes to power and cooling, cabling, and tying up a lot of ports on both Ethernet and fiber channel. This was a very workable solution, but as you started to scale, people started to go back to traditional blade servers once they kind of started embracing virtualization technology. But some of the challenges associated with traditional blade centers never really ran away. You have a great density of cabling and server and compute in a very small footprint. You know, you can get 16 servers and 10U of real estate. You get power and cooling benefits, you get cabling, a radical reduction in cabling. The thing that you bring with traditional blade systems, though, is you bring 2 additional fiber channel and 2 additional Ethernet switches per chassis. Now that's adding, although you've simplified the management of all of this from a server standpoint, you're adding complexity as now you've got to add fiber channel Ethernet switches, and every time you go to add that second chassis, you go to that 17th server. You're adding a lot of complications, all the complexity associated with one chassis. Now you're duplicating that, so now you've got 2 silos of servers that you're managing. And if you've only got 1 server in that second chassis, that's an awful lot of work and headache to manage 1 server. So what Cisco did was they said, you know, let's kind of get out of the box and let's start from scratch. Let's look at boot from SAN and how can we leverage that technology, and let's leverage, you know, something called service profiles that we'll get into to really start walking the line between virtualization and hardware as you start getting into HA and high availability applications and Microsoft clustering. So they took the brains out of the chassis and put those into 2 top of rack switches called 6120s or fabric interconnects. And they've taken the fiber channel and Ethernet and compressed it into 1 cable. So now fiber channel and Ethernet rides over 1 10-gig cable that's going up to your core. So from an uplink standpoint, you can get up to 40 gig of uplink capability to your core. You have SAN connectivity that you can tie back into these if you're still in a fiber channel environment. But everything downstream becomes very streamlined from a connectivity standpoint. You're uplinking your individual dumb chassis. All the brains, like I said, is up to the top of rack switches. Now as you look at these 8 server chassis, you've got very low intelligence in these chassis. The only thing they're doing is passing 40 gig of uplink capability up to the top of rack, 6120s. And now you've got a very streamlined cabling scenario that you're dealing with. From a management standpoint, everything's managed as one. And as you add chassis, you're not adding additional fiber channel and Ethernet switches every time you add a chassis. All your heavy lifting gets done one time, and then after that, you're just populating chassis, sliding in servers, and all of these 10 gig uplinks to the 6120s is really all and adding power is all you're really doing to add that to your solution. One thing that they did that's pretty unique is they came up with something called service profiles. Service profiles are really the identity of the server, the worldwide name, the MAC ID, the IP address, the LUN that it's tied to. And those service profiles reside in the 6120s. So as you boot from this server, it goes up and grabs that profile to determine what its identity is going to be. So it boots, it pulls this profile down to this server, and you say boot that server, it's going to go up, grab its worldwide name, BIOS, etc., grab the LUN that it's tied to, and start booting up. Now the flexibility that comes with service profiles is you start looking at applications that you can't necessarily virtualize with, or that you don't want to virtualize with VMware or other hypervisors. If you're using Microsoft's clustering, the complexities of that can be a little daunting. This is kind of the best of both worlds. If you have to go physical and you don't want to use Microsoft clustering, you can have a service profile set up on server 1. You can have an N+1 configuration. So maybe you've got an empty slot down here that you've got an extra standby server. This server 1, chassis 1 fails. I'm going to take that service profile that's up here in my top of rack 6120, and I'm going to assign it to that server, and I'm going to boot that server. That server is going to come up with the exact identity as server 1, chassis 1. Makes for some really flexible HA opportunities. Also, if you just want to move workloads from one type of a server, do maintenance, gives you a lot of flexibility that you just don't have in traditional blade systems and or 2U servers. So really, there's a lot of things that we talked about. Consolidation management, you got some nice flexibility to scale. You're not stuck with the 16-16-16 kind of silo associated with traditional blades. You reduced your 2U servers. You've gotten away from the wiring and the power and the footprint, and really an elegant way of scaling that's going to give you all the horsepower that you're really going to need as you virtualize the rest of your environment. Thank you.